And there you go. So Narayan, thanks so much for coming, getting up, what is it, early in the morning for you?
It's 10 a.m.
Okay, good.
Not early, yeah. Oh, and I'm always impressed when somebody remembers to record, because I think that's the thing that I manage to screw that up every time. And I mean, I lead a bunch of sessions sometimes. Yeah, so I'm really excited to see everybody here, because this is a topic that I'm just super passionate about. And so anybody who shows up to wanting to a conversation about making the world a better place, I'm like, yes, these are my people. This is excellent. So I guess a bit of background around me, and maybe even weaving in the song that you heard. That's a remix of, I think it's called like Buffalo Springfield. The remix is called "It's Time We Stop," and it's by a tropical house DJ, also in Canada, but out on the other coast. He's in Victoria, but I am in Toronto. And I also used to be a tropical house DJ, so that's the connection there. That's why I love that song, and I also thought the message had something to do with our topic of conversation today. So let's see, about me. I spent 10 years in the corporate world, trying to solve bigger and bigger problems. Started out as an analyst, worked my way until I was trying to do systems change for the entire organization, which was really fun. And that was around that time I discovered the adult development field, and thought that it really described a lot of my own personal journey. And I was also operating a not-for-profit that was attempting to save the world by teaching people to think more rationally, which I hold quite lightly. We still operate, and our view is that rational thought alone will not be enough to save the world. So what else is there? And now it's held more as an inquiry. And I currently work with cultivating leadership. Fairly new there, so excited to see where that sort of journey takes me as well. So the most relevant part of my background, though, is that I have been spending the last 3 or 4 years exploring various communities that are all trying to make the world a better place, but with completely different theories of change. I could show you my network map, and I might show you that in a little bit. That just goes through all of the different places that I've explored. But that's one of the things that led me to the adult development community, is because I think that this field holds something very special, some piece of knowledge or wisdom that has the potential to change the world. And so when I see this community, I also interact in a place called the Growth Edge Network, where a lot of really good discussions are happening on the cutting edge of this field. And I just love talking to people and figuring out what is it that we could do to help make the world a better place. Is there ways in which we can coordinate to help make the world a better place? And also at the same time, holding that as this is one community amongst many others that all have different theories of change, and how might we learn to coordinate with these other spaces, and looking at the places where all of these different ideas start to intersect, and what is there. So I'm hoping today will be a conversation. I'm going to share a little bit about what I've seen from the different places that I've looked, how they interact with adult development theory, and then I want to lead a whole bunch of discussions and sort of practice sessions for us to practice the style of dialogue that will help us to make a better, to better understand how we might start to solve some of the bigger problems in the world. So I think to set the context of today's supervision, total permission to lean into your achiever parts, the parts of you that just want to like go and get stuff done and do things. I carry a lot of that energy. So total permission to lean in there, or not. If you just want to play with the inquiry, that's too. And I offer the frame of serious play. So it's kind of like, we're going to be doing the most important work in the world today. We're actually talking about how can we change the world, but also this is just a sandbox and it's totally for fun. So we don't need to take ourselves too seriously, but also this is the actual work. It's not different from these conversations. This is, I believe, how we actually do change the world, conversations like these. So that's the framing I'll hope that we can adopt today. So I think I want to get us into breakout rooms as quickly as possible, just so we can start to meet each other and start to interact. But I'm going to start by defining the challenge a little bit. So I've said, save the world, change the world, make it a better place. There's a lot of assumptions in there. The world is broken. The world needs to be fixed. We have something to contribute personally to that challenge. And I think that's a part of the challenge itself, the difficulty to define what it is that we're trying to do, or at least me to come onto this call and offer a particular framing that we can play with. So this isn't, of course, the only way to solve these sorts of challenges, but Charles Kettering, who is he used to be the head of research for GM, he said that a problem well stated is half solved. And so I think just getting the definition of what is it that we're trying to do here today is going to be go a long way to helping our conversation. So I would suggest that we focus our attention on all sorts of different problems. And I don't just mean like the big problems. I mean personal problems. We have tons of people in the world focusing on our day-to-day challenges that we have, our own safety, our psychological safety, physical well-being, our feelings of belonging to places, our access to resources, like how do I get a job and put food in my mouth, challenges like personal addiction. Those are all valid problems. And so when I think about improving the world, I think about the personal problems. I think about the community problems, or the challenges that we face locally. Things like, how do our family dynamics work? What is our workplace like? How do we improve the workplace to make it feel more human? Is there local corruption in the government? Do we have dysfunctional societal dynamics where we don't know our neighbors? What about just resource management or bureaucratic processes? So I think that those are all another level of problems. And when I'm thinking about changing the world, I'm thinking about those problems too. And then there's national and global challenges that rely on huge amounts of coordination. Climate change, our economic systems, the different trends in media, social media, the political processes. How is that working? Is there bigger divides growing, or are we building coalitions? And also this general lack of meaning, a sort of zeitgeist that humanity kind of feels all together. Going through COVID together, how is that collectively affecting us? And so when I think about challenges, I think about those things as well. And I see all of these as interrelated. So the personal is a symptom of what is going on in your community, which is a symptom of what's going on nationally. And anytime that you look at any one of these challenges, they seem to be interrelated. Like the economic systems, the fact that sort of the profit motive within capitalism seems to be driving resource extraction. And we have this tragedy of the commons, where we have common resources that are being extracted at an increasing rate. And so the climate change and economic systems are inextricably linked together. And how does media cover this? Because that affects our ability to make sense in a democracy of how to even tackle either of these challenges. And so the way that I'd like to frame up the challenge today is to suggest that there might be a meta crisis, which is a challenge that we have as humanity in being able to solve any one of our individual issues, because they're so linked to all of these other issues. But that there's also a silver lining on this, which is that if we start to make progress on some of these issues, there seems to be spillover effects into a lot of the other challenges that we seem to face. So, so that's sort of how I might frame the challenge today. And what I'd like to do for this first breakout room, I'd love for us to meet each other, to say, who else is attracted to the idea of talking about and potentially deepening our understanding of these challenges? So getting to know each other. and also getting a little bit of the lay of the land for what problems this group is trying to solve. So this is at any level. Like we all come from different circumstances, so there's no judgment if one person's like, yes, I'm literally trying to solve climate change and economic systems, and someone else is like, I'm just trying to find a job right now. Those are all valid. Like I consider those to be like judgment-free. We're all working on different problems, and that comes from the different circumstances, that comes from the different groups that we're a part of. But the thing that I'd love to see is, can we get a sense of the different challenges that we're collectively thinking about? Because I imagine that that's going to inform the further discussion. Each of the challenges that we sort of surface offers us a lens or a way into exploring these broader challenges, because they are also interconnected. So, so we're going to do a 20-minute breakout room with groups of 4. And so, of course, I'll pop this into the chat as well. It's to share your names with the other folks and what brought you here today. And also, what problems are you trying to solve and how? Do you have a theory of change? Is there a thing that you're working on, or maybe you're just totally confused about that? That is totally cool as well. And because I'm super big on coordination, this is going to come up in the future. I've also popped a Miro board link in there that I would love it if at least one of the 4 was able to take some notes of some of the challenges that we're seeing, and some of the solutions. So if you pop into the Miro board at some point, you'll be able to see that there is a thing called Breakout Room 1. You can drag some of the sticky notes at the top. Actually, you know what, I'll share my screen and demonstrate. So if you pop in, you'll see this Miro space. If you use your scroll wheel on your mouse, you can zoom in and out, and you can click the screen to move it around, but we just want to be in this one tab called Breakout Room 1 right now. And so maybe I would say something like, one personal challenge that I face is I play too many phone games, and that like actually wastes my time. And I don't have a theory of change to solve that, right? Oh, actually I do. I totally have a theory of change. So maybe I'll go over here and I'll say, I put a timer on my games, and that's actually helping me. And if I want to be fancy, I could even drag a little arrow to say, yeah, those are 2. Another one that I'm sort of working on is I'm working with the Post-Growth Institute on economic change. Wow, I need to work on my spelling too. So economic change, and maybe my theory of change is something like systems research. So that would be 2 examples. And after these breakout rooms, I'm excited to see what kind of things sort of pop up on here, but we'll be able to, at a glance, get a feel for what it is that this collection of people here today is thinking about. So before I send us off into space, do we have any questions? Nope. Okay. Actually, I might ask Julia or Andrea. I don't think I have the breakout option. If you could do random groups of 4, that'd be fantastic.
Great. Create, and just gonna check that you haven't been placed somewhere. Okay, right, we're ready to roll if you are all okay with that. Everyone okay? It's kind of randomly different sizes groups because the group size changes, but let's go. Bye.
All right, welcome back, everybody. If you don't mind going on mute, I can hear some background noise from somewhere. I hope we all got to meet a couple other people. And what I'd love to see, or what I'd love to give us some space to do, I'm not sure if we were doing this before, but is to explore some of the themes that came out in terms of the challenges that we're facing. And maybe I'll share my screen. I'm not sure if everybody does have access to that Miro board. But let's see if we can spot some patterns and some interconnectedness between this. My hypothesis before these breakout rooms was that we were going to see some interrelatedness, and I know my group found a lot of resonance between the different things that we were seeing. So I'll give you guys a moment to take a look and see all the different challenges people are facing.
Naryan, I can't make out what's in those squares, those little, the writing.
Are you looking at my screen or your own Miro screen?
I'm looking at yours.
Okay. Does this help if I zoom in more?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm seeing some clusters here: sleepwalking, overwhelmed, eating disorders. These things, I think these things all seem, well, maybe I don't want to draw these arrows, but they all seem to be something related with each other. Radical uncertainty. Oh, yeah. Here's another one: trying to make organization better and rescuing a media company. Those seem to be related as well. So something about the workplaces that we're in. Oh, what career to follow? Radical uncertainty. Those seem pretty close. Maybe bad leadership would be related as well. Learning how to be more effective, that seems pretty related to what career to follow as well. Yeah. Turning into a screen dwarf. I love that. Yeah, and remaining sane. Oh yeah. So many of these things. And I think there's a way in which we could even actually try to order this in terms of complexity. Or maybe each one of these is a complex challenge, but we could order it in terms of putting a bunch of the, maybe on the left-hand side, I would put the things that seem to be more close and more personal. And then maybe some of the higher ones we could put on the right, or maybe we could do a vertical axis on this. But moving from sort of personal challenges into more systemic challenges, and understanding it that way as a movement of solving each one of these up and down the different scales. So let's take a look over here at some of the theories of change that we're following. Building awareness, waking up, trauma healing. Those are all facets of development. Within, I know Ken Wilber, he often talks about the 4 facets: wake up, show up, grow up, and clean up. That would be some of those ones. I see evolution and leadership development. Definitely got evolution in here twice. Fantastic. Individual and team awareness. More awareness, yeah. So it's interesting because looking at a lot of these theories of change that I'm seeing here, I can't always tell which of these theories of change applies to which of these problems. And I mean, I didn't plan this out ahead of the session being like, there's going to be this aha moment. I'm just realizing that right now in this moment. What does it mean? What does it mean that so many of these things that we're trying to do, it's difficult to tell which problems they solve? I think it means a lot of these ways in which we're trying to make the world a better place also seem to work on the personal level. And a lot of the things that we're personally trying to do is trying to make the world a better place. Like if I was even just to look at trauma healing, Well, there's personal trauma, but there's also organizational trauma, where there's patterns of behavior that exist within organizations that are caused by major events, and that the people within, the parts within the organizations have these reactions now baked into them because they were adaptive at some point. And now the organization, you could look at the organization similar to how you look at yourself, and trauma healing, some of the same movements might become possible. Waking up. I'm not sure if waking up was related to the one about sleepwalking, because maybe that's the connection there, or maybe they mean, or maybe the waking up is referring to enlightenment and meditation and mindfulness, and becoming more and more attuned to what is actually true by looking into your experience to the point where you can start to see the space between thoughts and understand, like that's so related to trauma healing. How do you start to understand the different parts of you that are affecting your thinking? And of course, this one also scales up. What does an awake organization look like? We're talking about building awareness. We can see working to build leaders with awareness. In a sense, that has a lot to do with waking up as well, waking up to understand yourself. And what would it look like for humanity to start to wake up, to understand its problems?
Naryan, I'm just wondering if different groups have a different orientation, because we sort of quite coachy people. So although there are quite a few OD people here today that are more systems kind of thinking, and I wonder if there's any relationship between how we see the world and our one-on-one daily relationships.
I'd love to hear from anyone on that. Like, what's the relationship, or how might the coaching work be related to the OD work and related to other societal change work?
I'll just jump in sort of with some ignorance. It's almost like some of these things are attractors that are operating at different scales, but they're attractors nevertheless. And so, there's microcosm and macrocosm versions of that. But I guess that's obvious. And I just wanted to, the things that are getting our attention on a local level are also getting our attention, are resonating on a more global level, that kind of thing. And so, the solutions happen in both of those places even simultaneously, because I mean the global level is made up of a bunch of local levels. So it sort of reminds me of the issue of climate crisis. It's like we can really address it at a local level, but we also need, there's a kind of synergy that happens between those. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, my curiosity is whether us as a bunch of people that focus on one-on-ones, we might over-egg the one-on-one thing.
Are we a bunch of people who focus on one-on-ones?
There's quite a few OD people here, but there's quite a lot of coachy type people.
But working with teams and organizations too, huh?
Yeah.
Don't know.
Yeah.
I went to a meditation program this past weekend where the person was talking about cultivating compassion, and we're sitting by ourselves practicing a meditation practice, cultivating compassion. What difference does that make in the world? And I think that's what we're talking about here. It's like from an individual level, it starts in, we have minds and we're working with our minds, and then relationships, and then it goes from there. It's like if it doesn't happen on a local level, it's probably not going to happen beyond that. It's like yeah.
So it's got to be rooted in the one-on-one, otherwise it can't grow.
Yeah, it's even more. It needs to be rooted in what we cultivate in our thoughts, in our minds. Yeah.
So I guess what I'm seeing here is actually two theories of potential change from looking at the coaching work. Like one would be, if we can coach leaders to become the best versions of themselves, they are influencing, especially if they're leaders of influence, they are influencing larger systems. And by them embodying what it means to be the best versions of themselves, they might be able to create the best organizations around them, the best versions of the organization around them, which could then interface with better organizations or something like that. Like, I wonder if the unit of change is the individual, but we believe that there is a ripple effect outwards, versus maybe the OD people, they go to the level of the individual and they might work with an entire intact team and sort of tackle it at that level, with the hope that changing the organization might start to change the individuals, but also go out and change the world. Like it's a expanding and a narrowing. And so that's a cool way of languaging one potential within the adult development space. But I want us to actually think of even more theories of change. What are other ways that we could even take our work and say, this field or this particular thing that I'm doing, can I build some clarity about how this might effectively change the world? And maybe there's certain tweaks, but I just think with the spirit of serious play, there's something fun about toying with these different ideas. So at this point, I'm going to share my own systems map of the communities that I've been exploring, and I'll share with you some of their theories of change. And this is so not conclusive. I'm 33 years old. I have not seen as many places as I would like to see, but I want to share with you the ones that I have seen. Because as you start to understand some of these other theories of change, that might give you a sense for how you yourself, or this thing we call the adult development field, might start to fill a gap that exists within the broader ecosystem of movements. So this is a higher level of systems. So let me share my screen. So I mentioned in the introduction that I might share this with you. But this is a systems network map of communities that I think have a role to play in making the world a better place. And so I might just go around and take some looks around here. My own personal journey here actually began on this side of the map with a community called the Effective Altruism Community. And so this is a community of about 10,000 people, and they focus on a variety of different cause areas. And one of their most important ones, I believe, is something they call cause prioritization. They use the tools of science and reason to basically say, what is the most important thing that humanity should be working on? And so one of the things that they do, they have a thing called GiveWell, which is the charity evaluator that says, if you want to save the most lives, what is the most cost-effective way to save a life? So in example, the Against Malaria Foundation has, they distribute bed nets to prevent malaria. And they think that for about, I think it's like $2,500, you could save a life. And they would compare that to something else like guide dogs, which costs like $40,000 or more to supply an animal to somebody who can't see. And they're like, well, if we did the cost effectiveness calculations on all these different things, you could save X number of lives versus this. And so this is a field of people that look really hard at ethical problems, and they try and put those ethical problems into action. So that's one community, and that's the way that they're trying to change the world. They want people to be more rational about doing philanthropy. And so I'll continue to weave through this network. So they have a coordinating body called the Center for Effective Altruism. I'm a member of the Effective Altruism Toronto network. And this network is now a bunch of people from this network are actually discovering the meditation space, which could be thought of as some sort of community. And so there's a thing called the Monastic Academy, which is a part of what I would consider to be modern monasteries. And they're looking to make the world a better place by bringing wisdom to those with power and power to those with wisdom. And they look at the 4 facets of development at an individual level. So my friend started a monastery called Willow that a bunch of people from the effective altruism community went there so they could learn to level up themselves in part of that waking up process. So that would be another sort of movement that I see in the world. The modern monasteries, places you can live for like a year if you wanted to, or just stay there for a month to up-level yourself, as well as the effective altruism community. Let's keep going. Let's keep going.
Ryan, I'm just curious.
Yeah.
I don't know that term up level.
Just like get better.
Okay.
Improve. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Maybe that's my jargon. Not sure which community that came from.
I'm keen on Canadian jargon.
Yeah. Adult development's in here, but I'll save that one. Let's jump over here to global systems change. And so there's a bunch of people that realize that the challenges of the world can't be solved just by using rational thought. There's too many interconnected pieces. You can't say, I can save a life for $2,500 by doing bed nets without looking at where are these bed nets going after they are used. Are they ending up polluting things? Are they not? What is happening with the education systems in the same place? How do all of these different causes actually interrelate with each other? And so there's a whole nother school of people that are trying to look at the world through that lens. And that's one bridge that I'm hoping to try and coordinate. I'm trying to bring systems thinking over to the effective altruism community because there's a lot of resources in one space. And I think a lot of wisdom in another as well. Branching off of that is a space that I sort of feel like I'm a part of, which is network weavers. People who are trying to do systems change just by bringing together people from different ways of seeing the world, which is in essence what I'm actually attempting to do with this conversation today. I am also a part, and so this would branch out of global systems change, which is post-growth economics, and there's another branch called well-being economics. So these groups are looking at the world and they're saying the capitalist economy right now is driving a lot of really negative feedback loops. And this is operating at every fractal level. So our personal desire for profit is causing us to act in competitive ways and often hindering some of our coordination. At the company level, when you have a whole bunch of companies that are trying to be as profitable as possible, and they are giving their profits in the form of dividends to shareholders, that contributes to an increasing wealth gap. And this increasing wealth gap, I think it's fair to say that those who have money find it easier to make money because money can help make more money. And so the post-growth economics and well-being economies, that are sort of adjacent movements that both say, you know what, profit doesn't make us happy. What we should be striving for is for us to actually be happy. So how do we decouple profit from well-being? How do we say that consumption isn't what makes us happy, but that there's so many other things that are completely abundant on this planet? Things like community and our own sense of well-being is not necessarily tied to consumption. So maybe we need some sort of new economic system that decouples these things so that humanity can continue to become better and better off from a well-being perspective while not needing our GDP to grow per se. GDP growth does tend to correlate with happiness, but it doesn't need to. And so they're looking at that, and that needs to feed into global systems change, because global systems change is looking at, like, there's the tech space of that, the cryptocurrencies. These people, there's at least 3 cryptocurrencies that actually make the world a better place every time this currency is created. So like this one called Seeds. it's focused on regenerative projects. So right now, when money is created, typically in parts of the world, in most sovereign nations, it's the private banks that actually profit off of the creation of money creation. Like, it's not that governments are creating it to just sort of fund government projects. Most governments actually will take loans out from private institutions. And so in essence, they're creating private profit every time money is created. These people have just re-engineered it to say, well, every time money is created, instead of private institutions profiting, we will use this to fund regenerative projects like planting trees. And it's a cryptocurrency. So just an interesting thing in the part of the world that I've explored there. So when I zoom out, and I'm not expecting you to read all of these, apologies, Susan. Each of these different movements, they're a piece of the puzzle. And I have adult development over here because I think it's a very, very important piece. I could point at a bunch of people in this space that are doing really, really interesting work. And I've heard from people here that are doing really, really interesting work. But I wonder what happens if we were to zoom out and say, kind of like the question Julia asked, which was, how does coaching change the world, knowing that there's all of these other different theories at play and all of these other different people trying to solve different aspects, from economics to global poverty to new tech and cryptocurrencies. All of these people are trying to do something. So with that, as a super quick 1,000-mile in the air, just like flyby of these, I want to again point us back to this meta crisis that I'm describing. So this meta crisis is saying that all of the things that we're trying to solve seem to be interrelated at different scales, from the personal to the global. And that one of the things that we might be able to do to improve all of this is to improve our collective ability to solve problems and to coordinate and to work together to actually solve some of these problems, or at least to make sense of them. Can we find processes that work fractally? Are there practitioners in the adult development field that are working with coaches? They're able to help coach an individual, but they're also doing OD work, and they can use a lot of the same tools that they do in coaching to actually help work and change organizations. Can you coach an organization? Could you take that one step further and coach an entire movement? Could you coach the leaders of the movement to help the movement become more effective? That would be interesting. And so this leads to my own personal theory of this meta crisis, which is I'm looking for solutions that scale from our kitchen to the whole planet. There's a group I'm working with, and they're trying to understand at a very deep level the individual practices we can take in our own kitchen that help us to understand the problems of broader society. Everything from how do we bring food into our fridge, to who's doing the cooking, to do the children really not want to do the dishes? And what does that say about how they are seeing the system? Are they thinking very individualistically? And is there a way in which we can help everybody to appreciate that doing the dishes is in service to the collective? We all want clean dishes, something. And are there ways in which we can redesign these systems to create harmony and an appreciation? And then once we start to understand that at a very deep level, how do we apply that more broadly? So I want our next breakout room, I want us to hold two things simultaneously. This is my challenge for us. Can we both have a discussion about how we might coordinate to make the world a better place? So this object level discussion, what skills do you have? What needs to be done? How do we match our skills with some of these challenges? What ideas do we have? But at the same time, hold the balcony view, a bird's eye view on the discussion itself, to say, how are we having this discussion? Is there a way in which we can improve the way that we are having this discussion such that we will get better problem-solving capacities?
Great.
Yes.
Okay, so must I just do the same breakout rooms?
I was actually hoping to have different breakout rooms.
Okay, I'll recreate.
Yes, and I'll post this into the chat as well. The instructions for us.
There we go.
So it's a practice, a serious play practice of coordinated exploration of sort of this problem space. So again, I'd love to do 20 minutes, 20 minutes, groups of 4, exploring the question of how might we, either individually or as some sort of representative of the adult development field, or as some sort of representative of whatever organization you're a part of, help to address this meta crisis on whichever level you feel like you should. And I'll recommend pausing about halfway. So Julia, maybe at the 10-minute mark, you can send everyone a reminder that says, maybe do a balcony pause and say, how has this conversation gone? Is somebody talking too long? Are we getting good ideas? Do we think we should have actually surfaced more ideas first and then gone into it? Did we jump straight to a solution? And we talked about that for 10 minutes. But I really recommend doing a balcony pause in the middle.
Okay.
And of course, I would love it if you were to take some notes in Miro as well. So to the right-hand side, you can see that there's a bunch of workspaces here. I'm not sure how many breakout rooms we had, but I think there should be a field for each one of us and some sticky notes. So if at least one person in the group would love to just sort of take notes on where your discussion goes, that'll be helpful for me later when I revisit this and say, how did each of these breakout rooms even coordinate? What kind of solutions came forward? Because that's part of how I'm going to learn as well. Any questions before we jump in?
Yeah. Okay.
Awesome.
Hey, Alistair. Hello and goodbye.
So now that we've all solved all of the world's problems, I think we can all pat ourselves on the back and go home. I'm just kidding. I would love to hear not about where you ended up and not about what you discussed, but I would love to hear a couple of comments on how that conversation went.
I can kick off. It was really awkward, particularly at the start. We spent a lot of time trying to make sense of what it was that we were trying to do. And we went quite around in circles, and in fact, so it took us a while, I think, to get a handle on, because it felt so huge in some ways. We went into it and it was like, my God, this thing is huge. It felt almost like trying to look at a giant problem. And then it took a while to refine it. And so we all kind of understood. I don't know, that was my impression of it. That's how our conversation started, was a little bit overwhelmed by the question. Certainly I was.
I took my anger in at the nature of the discussion that we'd had so far around the unrealistic lack of working with the context and some of the Margaret Wheatley stuff we talked about around we are on a trajectory here which cannot be changed, and it is the collapse of our civilization. And so what is most important for people and for leaders and for us is to work with that as a reality. And so the idea of changing the world is actually idealistic nonsense. We have to just get real and hunker down and do our work according to the terrain now, not according to a possible future where we solve all of these problems, because we're not going to. And so our group started off from one or two of us sort of voicing those perspectives, and it kind of went from there, which of course, if there'd been a different jumping off point, we would have had a very different conversation.
And I'll chime in on that one because I was a part of that same group. I loved the trajectory that our group took. It started off even before that by surfacing some of the emotions that were present, just hearing that question. And I think that provides a really nice ground for the conversation, because we were able to get to the point where like there was rage, delight, cynicism, optimism, overwhelm. And that is present in the conversation and sort of came out quite explicitly in the types of ideas that we put forward. And it came down to like, for our group to continue to make progress on this question, we would have had to grapple with to what extent is change possible? Because until we have agreement on that question, I don't think our group would have actually made any progress on the question. So the act of coalescing on what aspects are we disagreeing on, or possibly disagreeing on, maybe some of us hadn't thought about it, or the extent, what do we need to clarify to make further progress? That to me is part of the movement towards thinking about these things collectively with a group of, well, we had 5 people. Yeah.
Can I say something? Because I was one of the other noisy people that was on this role with Simon, and probably kick-started it. But what the dynamic in our group, I think what it's raising for me is, do we sometimes find people who are like-minded, and then we find the conversation progresses a little quicker and a little bit more smoothly? Or of what value is there to find in our group we had quite different views, actually almost 180-degree different. And to what extent is that useful in going forward? And I think that's where I left the group feeling that we would have a very long way to go for us to come up with something that we could all work at constructively, because we were at such diametrically different ends of our thinking around how do we solve the world's problems. Can we? So yeah, that was my question at the end of our conversation. And maybe my thought is that sometimes we do mix with like-minded people because we prefer it, and we count it as progress, and I'm not sure that it is.
I was left outside alone, and I was having a think with myself around that. And I found my thoughts drifting off to what I should cook for dinner, and having quite a lovely conversation with myself, trying to steer away from finding new ways of punishing or being mean to myself. And at the end of the conversation, I felt quite good about myself, and the thought of rewarding myself with a meal. And so my conclusion is that conversations do change the world. And I've come to a deeper understanding. There's this one community that I am in that just have these endlessly circular conversations. And I get irritated with them because there are no outcomes. And I've found now a way to understand what they're actually doing and what adult development can do for the world. And maybe it's to stop focusing on the outcomes of these discussions, but rather using some of the insights that we can gain from the adult development community, or having a different perspective on the world, and forcing or pushing or making conversations happen amongst some of the other role players in the scene, rather than seeking to achieve other kinds of outcomes. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I feel great about myself and what I'm cooking for dinner. But maybe it's not important to have outcome-based strategies. Maybe it's more important to have conversations. So, Todd.
Just to follow on what you say, this is just my sense of the conversation that we had. I have the sense that it very quickly became a very slow dialogue, but a dialogue nevertheless, from the moment that we tried to figure out what the question was, to moving into the explorations, the reflection on the conversation. And I don't know, other folks that were with me on that, in that group, I don't have the sense that we went towards any solution in any manner, but there were insights.
Mm. Mm. And maybe it's our definition of change the world that needs to change, rather than what we do, because I suppose we tend to think change the world means, I don't know, vaccinate 1 million people or make sure there are no more poor people. I suspect I'm being a bit cray-cray here.
So I wasn't in Christo's group, but we had a similar experience of not really being sure where we were starting, and it felt like a real journey down the river, you know, kind of meandering together. And what came out of it was an idea of identity and the individual, and how important the individual is. So that, you know, being in a conversation and being part of a group is great, but what we ended up with was how one person can make a difference. And so if we can help one person, then that person, and they make a difference, you know, that whole pay it forward kind of thing. I was saying that I worked with 80 teenagers in 2019, and if maybe one of those teens has made an impact in their communities, then it feels really big and important and valuable. And carried on meandering down this river and ended up talking about death and the importance of talking about, you know, people who are our ancestors, and talking about death and being open about that. So, you know, how do you jump from that one conversation to another? And that's what happens when you put people together. Yeah, it was beautiful. I'm not really giving it justice.
Yeah, I'd like to comment. There's in Tessa's group, and thank you, Tessa. Yeah, she explained it perfectly, but I think the key that stood out for me was after we dealt with how big the emotion and the scary feeling of, you know, how big is this apple and are we crazy to try and bite it? We went back and started throwing in our own personal stories, you know, and from that personal place of we each just shared, the three of us, this is what I'm seeing, this is how I think we can look at it, this is what I've tried before, this is how I'm trying to reimagine it. And from that personal place, then we weaved it into higher levels, as Tessa was saying. Then we took it to the society, and at the end, it took us to this fundamental understanding that this is all about death, you know, and how can we let things go more? So yeah, I think that coming back to the personal, which is what you speak about in the meta, is, you know, the value of that personal and the power and where that can take us.
I want to call out something I've heard in our group and I'm hearing in these bigger groups is the idea of polarities. I've heard a few polarities, this idea of the individual, collective, the outcomes and the process, and how do we navigate, you know, those polarities and you know, and the way I think about it is looking for the both and, or kind of moving in a direction that serves the moment and having that flexibility and adaptability. And so, and I kind of received the answers to this test already, because every Aephoria report, the coup de grace is the polarity page at the very end. So it's definitely on my mind, but I've heard it in this group, and it feels important in this, to me, in this idea of how do we move forward and how do I move forward in that polarity.
It's like dialogue itself works on polarity. There's no polarity, there's no flow of meaning. You need to have these little half understandings of each other and sort of misinterpretations of each other, etc., for the dialogue to unfold towards some unexpected place. We got to this unexpected place, Pete, and it's Pete's insight that when we were talking about the individual and the collective, and how you almost can't think of the one without the other. Pete said that, Pete, I'm going to repeat it here, and maybe you want to say more about it. He said perhaps the critical point is not the individual and the collective, but it's the space between individual and collective, because it's such a rich space. There are so many possibilities in this space, almost where it's neither individual or collective, but also not individual and not collective.
Krista, I think you've summed up what I was trying to say perfectly, so I'm not going to try and add to it. I'll spoil it.
I think that's so cool as a place for this conversation to get to. Yeah, like I think what Pete said, like you just put some language, and we've somehow gotten here where we're putting language to looking at the relational space between the individual and the collective, and that as potentially an interesting place to look as we explore how to make a difference or how to change the world, whichever of those framings there is. Yeah, that relational space and our ability to coordinate. And if I were to even like continue to close the loop and draw it over to, draw it back towards adult development, how does adult development help us to understand this relational space? How much are we actually helping people gain the capacity to take more perspectives, to hold different perspectives, such that they can start to actually have an awareness of the relational space between the individual and the collective? How are we showing leaders to think beyond an individual sense of meaning making, but to start to be able to hold the meaning making system of the organization that they're running? That's interesting. And I hadn't thought to look at that sort of like space in between the individual and collective.
And I feel quite energized by, or kind of, I think I've been doing a lot of unfocused stuff in the world, and this conversation with you and with myself about dinner has really helped me focus on what it is I want to do. And, you know, and the way in which my skills around adult development can change the world. And I stole this completely from a discussion you, Naryan, and Adam were having about, what was it, pushing conversations into spaces around and being able to be sophisticated enough to push the right words into the right hole, to broaden how people think about the world. And maybe you guys want to say more about that idea of pushing conversations into spaces.
Yeah, we were thinking about the idea of development as something that is quite good, and it was a common theme behind a lot of the challenges that we were seeing, was that we felt like we had to push development into different places, whether it's for other people in the company and you run the training program. How do you help everybody else value the fact that you're offering training programs? Or if you're offering training to rural communities and you're going to have a radio station that can help to broadcast some of this, how do you know if people are actually going to tune into that? And how do we change the culture such that, or the dominant narrative around development, such that people start to pull development, start to really want to go into these spaces of development? Yeah. And so, I mean, that would be a whole other theme or story arc, which is just talking about culture change.
I just feel like if you want to change the world, it's very doable to be a person that pushes conversations into stuck spaces, whatever those conversations might be. You know, broader than development, diversity, inclusion, psychological health, sexuality.
But in a kind of sophisticatedly perturbing way, like sophisticatedly antagonistic.
Yeah, for some of us, other of us, blunt force.
Well, I mean, I like the polarity between sophisticated and antagonistic. And if that could be the entry point, then brilliant. Because like shit's got to change. It's not going to be nice conversations necessarily that do it. I'm quite excited by that.
Yeah.
What's the risk, do we think? Do you think, Adam?
Well, I suppose the risk in a corporate, which is where I sit, is isolation.
Yeah.
That you get seen as a lone crazy motherfucker, excuse my language, sitting in the corner talking rubbish, which is what happens very quickly in corporates.
Yeah, it's isolation, or it's the other existential given that you might be facing in that predicament, and that's death. They just get rid of you. Yeah.
But maybe it's like that weirdness. What is that thing, Simon? You know, it's called weirdness index, perceived weirdness index.
The PWI, yeah.
So you have to keep your PWI low so that you can still mix without, you know, you keep your PWI low. If you have it too high, you're going to die or be isolated. So you try and you try and use the language of the system to introduce new ideas.
Yes, that doesn't have to be antagonistic. It seems to me that bait and hook mechanisms worked for a very long time in many contexts.
Yeah.
So I noticed that we've just got about 8 minutes left now. And I think the beauty of a conversation like the one that we've just had today is it doesn't have a satisfactory outcome. It doesn't have a conclusion. But I feel like I'm left with more questions, and I would love to maybe do a round where we could each just share one question, just a single sentence, just a question, nice and brief. Just sort of look into yourself and say, after the last hour and 50 minutes, where am I at now? What question in my mind? Is it a question that's been there before? Is it a new question? And I think, yeah, we can just go popcorn style. Pop when you're hot.
I'm feeling hot. The question for me is, and what now? For me as a person and as a practitioner.
I'll go next. The question for me is, are we talking about changing the world, or are we sharing different thoughts?
Well, for me, I feel like, what does this all mean? Like, at the end of the day, like, how are we gonna create this change that we so desperately want and need?
I almost want to say so what Simon said. So now.
Okay. I think the question that's in my mind is, how do I continue to push awkward questions into an organization when I'm so used to doing it in person and feel capable when we're in the same place, but feel so removed as I am now? That, yeah.
For me, there's you mentioned push conversations into stuck places, but there was another thought that went with that, and that was around creating pull for development. So that people actually have develop more of a desire for development. And for me, the question is how do you create that pull for development? How do you create more of that? How do you stimulate that desire for development, that desire for transformation, for change, for awakening, for whatever? Of course, what goes with that is, how do I get people to want me to do the development work? That's another story.
Kate, I saw you had your hand up.
Yeah, my question is who are we going to make the world better for? Is it for people in leadership roles? Is it people who can't afford to eat? It's like, better for what, and what is better? Would be my question.
Yeah. And my kind of question follows on from that. How do we understand greater good? And how do we create conversations that can hold various groups' visions of greater good?
My question is whether more mature people are necessarily better for the world, for the collective.
Yeah.
My question is linked to what Kate just said. Have we how sure are we that we are sure that the problems are indeed problems? And to whom are these problems for? Thanks.
I've got 3 questions bubbling up, which is what does my body have to say? What does the earth have to say to me? And what do people from other cultures have to say to me? I'm going to take those 3 with me.
My question is how to test and play. Just I think some ideas I brought into the space, some ideas I got out of the space. I think the question I'm leaving with is how to test and play.
Mine was how to have more serious play.
And my question is, what is my next question?
Pete.
It's the easy cop-out. If I can expand on it, it's not an easy cop-out. The easy one is to what are the next steps, etc. For me, I've got these swirling, half-emerging insights, and they're competing with one another, and I haven't settled yet on my next question.
Thank you.
I think for me, it's really to understand if we have to ask people from different sections of the world, what is currently your burning issue? To really find out what it is. Because my life view may be mine and another person's may be very different. And I may play in a field that's important to me, and it may not be an issue to the next person.
I liked what I think it was Krista was saying about stimulating the desire for change to create a pull for development. And so, yeah, my question would be something around that in terms of self-leadership, and how do we get people to have that internal motivation that they want to progress, and they want to grow, and they want to have those difficult conversations. And then it was something around how can conversations about death, just leading on from our group, help us to live more strongly, or live easier, live better.
I have not been keeping track of how many people have gone.
It's just
Is there anybody else who'd like to share?
I think it's you, Andrea. Sorry.
I went.
Oh, did you? Sorry, I didn't write. Forgive me.
That's us.
All right, then. Oh, and I'm curious about the impact that this conversation makes in the world. What ripples go out from this conversation? It depends on the definition of changing the world, but I imagine at least I have been changed by a bunch of the things that I've realized through this dialogue. So it's changed my world, I think. Maybe not in a huge way, but definitely not a small way. And so I thank you for joining me in this session of Serious Play. And thanks to Aephoria for hosting this platform. I always love it. We had 18 to 19 different people here. This conversation of people will probably never exist on a call ever again. We will never again look at this question in the same way that we had we not come to this call. So there is a sense of progress. And I think that this has changed things. So thank you each for contributing to this once in a lifetime opportunity to have some serious play and explore this question. So thank you all.
Yeah, thank you, Naryan. Every time I have an interaction with you, you stretch my brain. And sometimes I have to just follow you until my brain catches up. And I had a bit of an experience of that today. And I felt I had some really great insights that I can do something quite meaty with. And I suspect other people had that experience too. I think also another significant learning from you is, you know, when we watch people from other backgrounds facilitate, we learn quite a lot of stuff around how to use technology, how to language discussions, how to support other people. And that's what's also been so interesting about today, is not just the content of what you've delivered, but also learning about your facilitation style, and also the boards, which we're not that familiar with. And now we have some more learning to get on with. So thank you so very much, Naryan. I hope you'll come back and talk again, or come to one of our sessions. I think you are on the mailing list. And thank you everybody for coming today and engaging in this beautiful conversation.